presentation is altogether very different from Rabbi Jordi's in the sense that I'm focusing more on the historical and sociological experience of the conversos in Mallorca, and I will just touch on a little bit on the history, but I want to bring it to our days. Many times when we talk, not us because we are beautiful and cute, but in many other contexts, when people talk about conversos, they have all this movie about castles and princesses in Spain and beautiful songs, but they don't realize that the cryptos are a reality now, and that they are here, and they are real people, not to be mythified, not to be thought as something like mythical and past. So I want to cover a little bit what are the Xuetas in Mallorca, what happened through them through history, like briefly, and want to dwell on that, and then particularly what happened in the last 40 years, and how do I envision things going forward from then. So I wanted to begin with this image, which is not such a good picture. In 1983, Ramon Aguiló became the first mayor of Palma, the capital city of the island of Mallorca. And the next morning, there was an insulting graffiti in the prominent Magen David appearing in the town hall walls. Now, Aguiló was not a Jew. He was a Catholic. He was a Catholic of Jewish ancestry whose family apparently was forced to convert in the 14th century. How did people know? So this is the question. This is the big difference between the Jews, the Crypto-Jews in Mallorca, and those in communities like here in New Mexico. The Xueta, also spelled Xueta with CH, are descendants from forced conversos, and they survived as an identifiable minority since the late 14th century to our days. And I want to emphasize the identifying minority because if you think of the New Mexico Crypto-Jews as being somebody that is underground, somebody that can pass as being Christian in a way, in the case of Mallorca, it's the opposite. Everybody knows that these guys, these families are Jewish, so it makes for a bigger possibility of discrimination and a whole different sociological dynamics, right? So what is the meaning of the word Xueta? According to the Albuquerque dictionary, a Xueta is a Mallorcan Christian of Jewish descent whose ancestors converted, relapsed, and then reconverted. As an adjective, it means a dubious, treacherous person. And as an adjective in the feminine, it means a dirty, sloppy woman. And as such, the word is still being used to our days. In reality, the etymology of the word Xueta comes from Xueta, which means small Jew or the son of a Jew. And there is a semantic interference with the word Xuya, which means bacon. There is all sorts of popular beliefs as far as the Xuetas being called Xuetas because after the conversion they wanted to prove that they were not Jews anymore, so they ate pork in public or cooked with pork in public. But most of this is essentially like urban legend. What we know is that this is the origin of the word. So what is the history of these people? The current number of these people is around 20,000. And as I said this morning, you cannot think of 20,000 people with a strong Jewish identity and ready to convert, but rather 20,000 people descended from those families. The level of them being actual Crypto-Jews with a Jewish identity, I mean, only God knows how many of these people are really interested in Judaism at all, but they are at least self-identified as conversos. The current population of Mallorca is 869,000, so it's a small minority, but it's still a sensible minority. And as I say, they are cryptos in a different way because everybody knows who they are. They don't need to go underground. Everybody knows that you're one, and you're going to suffer because of that. They are all people marked by 15 distinctive family names. Aguilar, Bonet, Cortés, Forteza, Fuster, Martí, Miró, Picó, Piña, Pomar, Segura, Terongi, Valentí, Valeriola, and Valles. Now, other descendants from Anusim, from forced conversos, are not included here and paradoxically not discriminated by society. So people with standard family names such as Vidal or Shalom or Maimo or Jordao or Daviu are not being discriminated or being considered Xuetas. Anusim means forced converso. It's a Hebrew word that means to force.
Do you know why those are identified in the unit?
Yes, there's a whole story about that. I suggest.
And a few of these are names you find in New Mexico, such as Peña,
Yes.
Cortés.
Yes. Yeah.
And the first one, what's the first one? The very first one with the A?
Aguilo.
Aguilar?
Aguilo.
Aguilo.
Yes.
Aguilar, I always hear.
Mhm. Sir?
Oh, are there also Muslims that stay there but forced to convert to Catholicism?
Yes, but those are lost in time. They never constituted a minority. It's identifiable as such.
They're no longer
Yes.
viable, they're just a conversion.
Yeah, pretty much. For the sake of time, I suggest we hold questions until the end, and we'll probably.
Sure.
Okay, so I was saying that these names, on the other hand, are pretty common in other areas of the country. So in other areas of the country, meaning the country being Catalonia and not necessarily Spain, they are not identified as Jews. It's a Mallorcan phenomenon, right? Among themselves, people identify, Crypto-Jews identify each other by the people of the Sayer Street, which was the street where most of them lived at one point, people of ours, or simply us versus the people from the outside world, the others, or people del carrer, from the street, and also del car. And it is perhaps coincidental, but I think it's pretty interesting that it's a way very similar on how Sephardim in Spain identify themselves. We would say, oh, los nuestros, our people, by opposition to the rest. Or we say people from the Cahal, in the Kai, right? So coincidental or not, this thing we have in common. So the Jewish presence in Mallorca is probably as early as the 8th century. We have some documentation about that. By 1229, when James I conquered the island, there is already an organized Jewish community over there. And the king considered the Jews as his property, which means he protected them and he benefited from them, from their loans, for instance. They were very active in maritime commerce, in jewelry making and leather goods. And at one point they started having problems with the Catholic Church because they owned Muslim slaves and they converted them to Judaism. So it's a big no-no for the Catholics. Tensions in part started there. By 1263, we have the Disputation of Barcelona, where Nahmanides was forced to defend the Jewish faith in front of people. Around 1273, we already have open Christian proselytism, like public disputations, inspired by the famous thinker Raymond Dude. During the kingdoms of James II, Alphonse III, and then back to James II, who regained power after some struggles, there was a progressive deterioration of the situation of the Jews They were applying them, inspired by the church, they were applying them like heavy taxes, for instance, and making their lives more complicated. Things go like really sour when in 1299 James II authorizes Raymond Yud to preach in the synagogues, meaning Nahalat Shalom, Shabbat service, you guys have to admit this Catholic priest to preach to you, and you cannot leave until he's done, Saturday after Saturday. And this is approved by the governor of Mexico, right? You get it. By then it sounded normal, I don't know. What were they thinking? But yeah, that's the point. In 1309, we have the first blood libel. So they accuse the Jews of killing somebody, usually a child. In 1370, we have an equation of the plague, the Black Death plague. And who's to blame after there is a plague? Those who don't like Jesus so much. Which makes it by 1391, exactly on July 9th, which is the first of the Lul, in Valencia, 200 Jews were killed, inspired by Friar Vicente Ferrer, who baptized almost everybody else. It is remarkable that Vicente Ferrer is known as Saint Vicente Ferrer after that. In 1391, exactly on August the 2nd, in Mallorca, all the citizens, the Christian citizens, entered the Jewish quarter and tried to kill everybody. By that time, 300 Jews were killed. 800 escaped to the castle of Belvedere. Some sailed to North Africa, and most of them were forcefully baptized. From there, the riots extended to other parts. They extended to Barcelona, and to Girona, Zaragoza, and other cities in the Crown of Aragon, and then to Spain. Mallorca is in the Mediterranean Sea, in the quadrant that is between France, Spain, Italy, and Algeria, over there in the Western Mediterranean. Yeah, near Sicily. Right. So by 1391, almost all the community was totally destroyed. There's no Jews proper. Then we have the beginning of the phenomenon of the conversos, 1391 to 1488. By 1435, the few Jews that were practicing in the open and not converted to anything were actually forced to convert and forced to be baptized. So by 1438, there were no Jews left in Mallorca at all. No Jews, like normative Jews. Which means that by the time 1492 came and the edict of expulsion took effect, there was nobody to expel because nobody was left. Interestingly enough, by that time, by the beginning of the killings, short after the beginnings of the killings, they started to organize themselves in confraternities, or we call them in Catalan confrarías, or in Spanish cofradías, right? Like the confraternity of St. Michael of the Converts. They were beneficial institutions of help. They were helping themselves. They had to also to do about taking care of the widow and the orphan and the sick and whatever. And it was a little bit like taking the government of the Jewish quarter and making a quote-unquote Catholic structure that would keep the governance of the Jewish people still going under the idea that it was a confraternity, a Catholic confraternity. So at that point, conversos were going underground somehow, but in a way, quite undisturbed. The problem came when Spain unified. So with Isabella and Ferdinand, and they had to create a unity not only of people but also of faith. So that's the creation of the Inquisition. It is not enough for people to have converted to Christianity. We have to make sure that their Christian practice is pure and they are not reverting back to Judaism. Right? So those are the beginnings of the Inquisition. And at the beginning of the Inquisition focused on the biggest problem they had, which were Crypto-Jews. And they issued what we call the Edicts of Grace. You will avoid severe punishment if you self-incriminate. If you say, okay, yes, I converted, but I do Shabbat. Okay, so instead of burning, you will be, I don't know, chastised, and then your eyes will be popped or something, but you will not be burnt alive, at least. So there was this grace, so to speak. After these Edicts of Grace, so much 599 cryptos confessed still having Jewish practices, and we're talking almost like 100 years after the first attacks, right? And the worst thing is that they gave the names of many Judaizers. So by 1544, 239 Crypto-Jews were reconciled, 82 were burnt, and 455, which is interesting, were burnt in effigy, meaning they burnt statues of them because they... So then we enter a time of new clandestinity between 1545 and 1673. At that point, the Inquisition is a lot less concerned with the Crypto-Jews because they think they are under control, but they were a lot more concerned about Protestants because Protestantism is beginning to take. The Cryptos, on the other hand, and we talked about this on Friday, I think, the Cryptos have they have better strategy of protection. And from the later trials documents, we know that they decided to transmit the practices of Judaism only in the family and not in public settings or groups of families, and only to women before marriage. Why? Because if you transmitted it to a guy and the guy was a talkie, it was a lot easier to be denounced if you have only like the women in the family know what kashrut and nida is. At least you could keep on going a little bit more undisturbed, right? Then from 1640 on, the conversos had a marked economic ascent in mercantile companies, foreign trade, and at that point they started having a lot more contact with normative, so to speak, Jewish communities. They traveled and sold stuff to Livorno, Rome, Marseille, and Amsterdam. And to our days in Mallorca, when somebody goes missing or doesn't answer their phone, you say, oh, this guy is going to Livorno. Why? Because anybody who went to Livorno from the Crypto-Jews never came back. They reconverted over there, and that's it. They established some sort of a social stratification that still holds to our day. They divide themselves in high-ear Jews and low-ear Jews, right? Meaning the high years, the richest, and perhaps the descendants of the Kohanim and the Levim and the other people. So, unfortunately, by 1673, we have a second wave of persecution. The Inquisition has big concerns about new Jewish practices. Why? Because Christian servants of conversos denounced them to the Inquisition. So everybody enters into alarm mode, and the prosecutor of Mallorca's tribunal sends a report to the Supreme Inquisition saying that he is realizing that the Xuetas, that the conversos, are not intermarrying. They are naming the children with Old Testament names and not saints from the Catholic Sanctuary. They are sending money to a synagogue in Rome. They are holding clandestine meetings, and they are observing dietary practices and Shabbat. In 1677, servants denounced their master, named Frau-Cortes, that people were meeting in a garden to observe Yom Kippur. 1677, from 1391, people were still holding their stuff and knowing enough to lead Yom Kippur services. Unfortunately, 1679, 2 years after that, the building in the garden was demolished. They sowed salt in the land, and they sent 221 Judaizers to prison. Another bad story happened in 1688 with Frau-Cortes. This guy married a Christian and was ostracized from the Jewish community. As a reaction, he decided, I'm going to denounce everybody. So he gave a bunch of names. They knew they were going for them. We know all this because of historic documentation. So they organized a escape, and they convinced an English ship to take them out of the island. While they were going to the ship, the police, or the equivalent at the time, the militia, went and detained them all. After that, there were 3 years of trials, and some 73 of them were condemned, and most of them burned alive because they didn't want to reconvert to Christianity. After these horrible stories, there were a number of other autos de fe, 1691, 1718, 1720. This last one was against a person that also had my name, Gabriel Cortes, who was born in Effigy because he had flew to Alexandria, where he returned to Judaism. Around that time, Francesc Garau, a Jesuit, publishes The Faith Triumphant about the autos de fe in 1691, which will pass as a regular, not transcendental book, except by the fact that it's been republished in 1755 and 1857, and then several times in the 20th century included. So this whole story, I mean, it's not about politically correct. In good part of the society, this whole politically correct is just not in their radar. In 1773, the Xuetas were sent deputies to King Charles III to ask them to have equal rights with the Cristianos Viejos, with the old Christians, with the Christians regulars.
When was King Charles III? Where was King Charles III?
In Madrid. He was the king.
It sounded such an English name.
Oh yeah, Carlos. I mean, usually we translate the names of all the kings. It's like James was Janway.
Okay, that's why it's confused.
So by 1812, this is to the end of the old regime. This is the abolition of the Inquisition, and we finally have civil equality. Get the date 1812. Until 1812, we do have Inquisition. They are not essentially killing people that late, but we still have it. The First and the Second Republics in Spain, 1869 to 1936, were very important and very interesting for progressive people in general, but also for the Xuetas. Many Xueta intellectuals take leading roles in the Renaissance, which is the renaissance of Catalan culture in Mallorca and in the rest of Catalonia. We have writers like Tomás Aguiló, Mariana Aguiló, Tomás Forteza, and politicians like Miguel Forteza and Rafael Ignacio Cortés. Most of the Xuetas were in favor of liberal and republican ideas. And please understand republican not in the American sense, but in the Catalan or Spanish sense. We have the monarchist, Catholic, narrow-minded kind of person, and then everybody who thinks a little bit more progressive is a Republican and anti-monarchic. Right? So Republicans in that sense. What happened is that the whole progressiveness of the Second Republic finished in 1936 with Franco's coup d'etat. and the dictatorship, 40 years of dictatorship that extended after the Civil War. Franco, who is said to be also a descendant from Jews, but it's not totally proved probably, was against everybody who was not a fascist, and this greatly affected Xueta intellectuals. He was also really close of Mussolini and Hitler, so there were clear rumors of his plans of having everybody listed from the crypto-Jewish community and deport everybody. Luckily, he never entered the Second World War, so this thing never materialized. By the end of the war, he needed to make his very interesting kind of peace, so he exerted like a huge repression against all non-Catholic. He went and closed all Protestant churches. He didn't have to close any synagogues because those were forbidden. But in 1960, when he still was in power, tourism happens. And he wanted to show a nice face and have people visit. So he introduced a series of reforms, like recognizing for the first time since the Republic the freedom of religion in private but not in public. That means that you could be a Protestant or a Jew, but you could not have a public church. All Protestant churches or synagogues, when we grew up, never had outside signs, or you would not have like an agenda lit in front of it or something like that. You were like in a garage or something. So around 1960, yeah, exactly in 1960, the British residents opened the first synagogue, or so they tried, because the first permission they requested in 1960 was denied by the government that argued that in Mallorca there were no Jews, right? Not only not the 20,000 cryptos, but also not the Brits that were living there. There are no Jews. The guys, the British Jews, normative, regular Ashkenazi Jews, kept on celebrating their services. In 1966, they started celebrating services at the Anglican Church in the basement, then in several hotels. And in 1970, still during the dictatorship, they founded the first synagogue, the Comunitat Israelita of the Balearic Islands. Right months after the death of the dictator, in 1975, they acquired the cemetery, and in 1987, I bet, they finally opened the first synagogue. One would think we finally have a synagogue, things are looking good for the Xuetas, but nope. The new synagogue was traditionalist, nominally Orthodox. They would have an Orthodox kind of service, but they would sit like side by side, women on this side, men on this side, not that observant. I mean, traditionalist more than Orthodox. The English language was the main language. They were British, right? British may live in Mallorca for 30 years in a row and not learn a single word of Catalan or Spanish, and that is normal. That happens. It's not a criticism, it's just...
How did they get there? Were they merchants or diplomats?
No, they were mostly retired.
Tourists.
Yeah, tourists. So English was the language of the synagogue. The services were 100% in Hebrew. Some complementary words or phrases, greetings in Spanish, no Catalan whatsoever. The Xuetas were, of course, seen as total outsiders. But, however, at that point there was certain tolerance. There was one guy, Nicolau Aguiló, who after that became Rabbi Nisan Aguiló. I'm not getting this right. Yeah, Nisan Aguiló. He returned to Judaism and made Aliyah and lived in the Shetachim, actually, in the territories. In 1990s, there was an eruption of more Orthodox members. The synagogue that was without a rabbi, like lay led, hired a Moroccan Hacham who was supposed to be like more open to Sephardim, but he was not so much. And then, unfortunately, and I don't want to get into politics because maybe some of you are really close to Lubavitch, but when Lubavitch came in, they had a very, very strict Orthodox observance, and they were like in a total context of what, not only what being a crypto-Jew was, but even what being a normative Sephardic Jew was. So they would be there, it's like, oh, these Jews don't understand. I was explaining things about Shavuos and they didn't get it. It's like, well, try pronouncing Shavuot. It's like, there was a big cultural difference between this guy and the synagogue per se. So if the Xuetas at that point were not really welcomed, after the turn towards Orthodoxy of the synagogue, this was even worse because not only the Xuetas, but also non-Orthodox Jews, non-Orthodox converts in particular, were not welcome either. By the time of the late 1990s, the old retired British Jews died out. Then the generational renewal did not favor the Xueta community at all. Shavei Israel opened the center in the island. The objective was to try and return people to Judaism, but also, again, it was with focusing on returning them to Orthodox Judaism and to take them to Aliyah. You read in it whatever you want, but no, I will not comment on that because I'm a good guy. In parallel, all the Xuetas were creating cultural associations outside of the synagogue, like Liagat Juel, which means Jewish heritage, or the Association for Cultural Relationships between the Balearic Islands and Israel, and the network of Jewish quarters, in order for people to say, okay, we have an important, nice medieval Jewish quarter, people should come and visit, right? It's just like over there, nobody's paying attention to it. And since then, there has been a steady flow of conversions to Judaism from the cryptos, but hardly ever in Mallorca. They were all people who went and lived in Israel. They lived in the mainland, in Barcelona, for instance. So, yes, yeah, I think that's key. Right. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. So, how are things right now today? Well, the discrimination is slowly disappearing from Mallorcan society, mostly because Mallorcan society is losing steam left and right. In part because of the influx of people, in part of because political decisions that did not favor the local culture and language, and sort of imposed a more general Spanish modern view. However, this discrimination has not disappeared totally. The University of the Balearic Islands in 2001 made a study where 30% of the respondents say that they will never marry a Xueta. 5%. No. General public saying that 30% of general society say, I will never marry a Jewish convert. Right? 5% say they did not have a single Xueta friend, and they didn't want one either. In 2011, Rabbi Nissim Karelitz of the Beit Din of Bnei Brak decided that as long as Xuetas had not intermarried other people, they were still Jews. But their return to Judaism has to go through a Jewish court, and which will judge things case by case. For what I know, Xueta returnees are still not integrated into the main Jewish community and not accepted. So this is my story. I'm sticking to
Can you say something about your personal family or your personal experience growing up with this?
I was born in 65, so by that time, yes, we knew we were Xuetas, but it was not something that was so relevant. We didn't know anything about it. You usually, I think the first time I heard the word was because some kid was bullying me at school, but there was not like a strong identity.
Or teaching?
No, that's the problem. In New Mexico, you can say, okay, there is not this external identification of the minority, but there is a culture of practice. The culture of practice among the Xuetas maybe exists somehow, but it's very, very diluted. So there are very few practices that you can pinpoint as being transmitted.
So you can talk about
Very, very like a special dinner on Friday night or cleaning the house on Fridays and not on Saturdays. It's things like that, but nothing that will call your attention as being particularly Jewish per se. Yes.
Is there ever a subculture of Xuetas that study the Kabbalah in New York?
That I cannot tell really, because if there was, we don't really have historic documentation to prove it. The different researchers in ethnomusicology and history have not either found a particular genre of songs that the Xuetas sang or something like that. It was more about songs against the Xuetas, that we have a lot of anti-Semitic songs in Mallorca.
Any flamenco connection? No, like
Well-
1800s or
Well, flamenco is totally non-indigenous to the region.
to that region?
Yeah,
Okay.
so it's like a modern import.
So what are the Xuetas on the outside? Are they practicing Christians? They're functioning in society. On the surface, they're Christian. Are they underneath Christian?
Right, I guess this will be established a little bit case by case, but in general, like the older generation of Xuetas were extremely Catholic in the outside. They wanted to pass, so they will be the most Catholic of anybody else. As the country went progressively more and more secularized, probably the Xuetas were the first, like during the First and Second Republic, to be the less practicing at all and the less openly non-Catholic. So they would not affirm themselves as being Jewish or practicing any other religion, but they would not have anything to do with the Catholic Church. Yeah.
So the ones that were practicing, did they have like their own separate churches and also priests? And all
Right.
that was separate from the rest of the Catholics?
Well, since the beginning of the converso movement, there have been a number of conversos taking the priesthood, and there have been particular churches in the city of Palma that were really targeted towards conversos. As a more modern phenomenon, you have syncretist, a couple of syncretist churches, like some guy that has a Christian, crypto-Jewish follow. They have like it's a particular church of their own, but it's a Christian church.
And how does it compare conversos in Mallorca to conversos in mainland Spain?
Well, it is a quite different situation because, like in New Mexico, most of the conversos in mainland Spain are not identified by the outside world as being such. So they may have Christian, they may have Jewish practices, or they may have like underground identification, but it's not that this whole sector of the population is identified as Jews. Yes.
To what extent did the different families intermarry and know that each other had the same roots?
Yes.
And were there any medical consequences because of intramarriage? Because that's just one topic that comes out sometimes.
That probably Shelley knows a lot more than I about that. There are problems in terms of there are certain genetic patterns, some skin diseases and things that are very particular to the Xuetas. But I guess the sample is big enough for it not to be like a huge problem. But yes, marrying among Xueta families was common, and there were no categories between them. Marrying other people who were outside of the Xueta community, at least until the 1940s, 1950s, was a major one. It was just not until
well, you know Peter Bonin.
Yes.
Very good friend of mine. Do you want to talk about his book, or should I bring it up under genealogy?
Yeah, you can bring it.
Because that was a revolution in
Yes.
Spain. Peter Bonin is a Xueta. He married a non-Xueta, and that was a scandal in itself,
Yes.
with his wife's family. But he published a book called Sangre de Dia, and he listed thousands of names, and they're documented in documents that he went and found in archives, that these are documented Jewish names. Pre-Inquisition, Inquisition, post-Inquisition. And the first edition that came out only had the name. So when the first book came out, he was getting death threats every day. People saying, "How dare you?" And on the other hand, people would say, "Yeah, we've always known it, so what's the big deal?" But the fourth edition that came out a few years ago, I made him do it because I said, "This is not good for genealogists. We need to know where the families are from." So he went again through all the documents and has the name, the city, and the year of the document. So for anybody doing Sephardic research, it's fantastic. But this first book caused such a revolution in Spain of actually bringing it up, like if this is your name and this was a Jewish name. And it sold out, I think in a month the book sold out. Everybody hated it and they were going to kill him, but every book sold out.
Also, researcher Rosa Planas has published a book of Xueta families, prominent Xueta families that took other names,
Yes.
Particular name like popular names, in order to escape discrimination. So there's a whole inventory of names. It's pretty well studied.
What Sangre de Dia. You can't buy it in the States. You can get it online at Casa del Libro.
Yes.
Why can't you put it here? Because nobody sells it.
Sorry, we look for it on interlibrary, no, in your public library.
Yes,
maybe
collected works.
trust
I've never seen it.
or-
I've never seen it on the interlibrary.
Well, or half it trust or one.
Find somebody who lives in Barcelona and send it to you. It's only 18 euros.
Yes. How are you doing in terms of time? I think the first yes.
I have some friends here who attend a Messianic Jewish temple.
Right.
And I've always thought of that as more of a kind of a theological thing. I've never thought of it as having any cultural or ethnic roots. That's probably true. I'm guessing that there's no connection between.
I don't think there is
Messianic
a connection between Messianic Jews, which essentially started being a Protestant denomination intended to convert Jews, and these other syncretistic kind of churches like the ones in Mallorca, which are very, very minority, very much in the fringes, but they feel themselves there as Catholic. They recognize their Jewish heritage. But this is, even among the Xuetas, is like a very tiny minority.
It seems like from what you were saying that the overt anti-Xueta persecution was much stronger in Mallorca than perhaps in the mainland of Spain.
Yes, very much.
Why? Do you understand why?
Well, because you're reducing everything to 15 family names, it's a little easier to discriminate against somebody who you know, than not somebody who is underground. And on the other hand, it's an island, and until the touristic invasion, who wanted to live in a poor, dry island which is half desert? It's like nobody
Mexico.
Sounds just like
discovered your roots?
Well, I don't have to discover my roots because my roots were there in front of me.
They let you forget.
It's different. They won't let you forget your roots. It's a matter of making the concrete decision of following your roots or not.
And that's where the study came in?
Yes.
Just curious, much of the early talk about what was going on in the 12th century and 15th century, this whole concept of conversion to Christianity is a spiritual thought process, not a blood process. It's not in your blood. You relapse, you're relapsing in your spirituality, you've erred as a person. It's still not a blood thing. If you continue with your Judaism, you're expelled. You're not being executed on trial for being Jewish. You're exiled.
Right.
What you're being put on trial for is ostensibly pretending to be Christian or Catholic, but really not.
Yep.
When does it cross over into this sort of blood thing? You're a Cortez. You're a Guido. But when does it become no longer what your practice is?
Well, at the
but
beginning,
it's your blood.
at the beginning of the converso phenomenon, people somehow assume that, well, if you're so convinced that now that the Jews have converted to Christianity, they are like perfected Jews and they are all going to heaven and they look like Catholics, why are you going to suspect of them? If then 100 years pass and you still see that we are, Opuras, forced to kill Jews because they are not behaving and they're going back to Judaism, then you start thinking, okay, this must be a common token in their genes. It's like they cannot really be good Christians. They always end back going back to Judaism. Therefore, if I know that you're a good Catholic descendant from a Jew, you'll be suspected that one day or the other you will be back to Judaism because it's in your blood. It's in your blood. It's what in Romania they say taking a Jew and baptizing it is like taking how do you say a goose and putting it in water and saying now you're a swan. It's like it will not happen. It's just like a make-believe. Yes.
But isn't the whole term to blood also related to the establishment of colonies in the Americas and the confrontation between indigenous people and Spanish? So suddenly there's people who really look very different, and so there's this notion of blood as well.
There is, but there is also about the need of the Spanish culture of having uniformity. The U.S. you can be American and celebrate Christmas, and you can be American and celebrate Diwali, and you're still American. For a Spanish person, even to our days, somebody who is a Spaniard and doesn't celebrate Christmas is kind of an anomaly, like a non-Greek Orthodox Greek, right? This search for uniformity sociologically has brought the Spanish civilization to look for uniformity in language. So it is not coincidence that of the 4 languages of the Spanish country, 3 are strongly discriminated and 1 prevails over the rest. It is not coincidence that whatever the Spanish government has conquered the country, they converted everybody to Catholicism, and they didn't necessarily tolerate people being other religions. We are hopefully the Spanish civilization is moving on from that, but that's the historical baggage, is this need for uniformity.
That's very ironic considering that the Golden Age, the medieval Golden Age, had so much diversity. So it seems like what happened from the time of the Inquisition was such a strangling suppression that the consequences
this rather happened on the Islamic rule, although this also has been a little mystified, because there was a certain coexistence, but it was not that everyone has full rights. But yes, you're right that the institution of the Inquisition and this search for the unity of the country and the expulsion of the Jews and the Arabs didn't favor the sciences or the free thinking in the country. I mean, I would say that after the expulsion, it was because of the Americas that the empire didn't really collapse, because they were losing like all the intellectuals.
Well, you go back to this blood situation, genes. How come you said there are other people who don't have these 15 names, one of the 15 names, or what we call the and they're not discriminated against?
Right.
Is that because nobody knows who they are?
Essentially, the 15 name list has also to do with a particular historical fact that the last auto de fe, when an auto de fe happened, it was shown to the whole population. It was like this big spectacle, and people would go and visit the kings, right, or the judge. But another thing that they did is they took the gremalletas, the hoods that the conversos were wearing to the judgment, and they hanged them in San Domenico church. So for the longest time, the Inquisition was not working anymore, but you could see the 15 names of the 15 families hanged in the tunics and hoods of the last people that were killed. So that's where they took the list of 15 families. After the many years, they forgot about the rest of the families. They knew that those 15 were for sure Jewish.
This may sound like a real trivial question, but during Semana Santa in certain parts of Spain, I think people march with various religious statues and also with hooded, with hoods. I'm wondering, is there any historical relationship?
Probably there is a historical relation, or at least.
Are there like penitentes, like repentant Jews?
Well, the whole idea of making them wear a gramalleta was essentially to mark them as relapsed. So they were Christians. These Christians had committed the sin of practicing Judaism. Now this whole shebang was to bring them back to the Catholic faith.
Right.
And if they didn't repent, to kill them. So this whole idea of them being penitents also made for that.
Right, and this might sound like, just when you mentioned the blood thing, I mean, it almost sounds like Nazism, because under Hitler, you could never escape being Jewish. If you were 1/4 Jewish, you were considered Jewish. So I'm surprised, because I don't look at that the same way in terms of Spanish culture, and even in terms so much of traditional anti-Semitism, or a secularization and a quasi-false scientific type of anti-Semitism, which evolved along with the apparatus of the state to institutionalize, basically institutionalized anti-Semitism based on false science, i.e. blood.
Right. I think we have the time for one question.
I'm sorry, just a comment.
Yeah,
So how large is the current Spanish population have Jewish and Muslim ancestry? Is it very small or is it large? Why did the people of Muslim ancestry not have the same experience as the people of Jewish ancestry?
How large is the number of descendants of Jews or Muslims in Spain? I don't know. In Mallorca, as I say, Jews represent, descendants of Jews represent like 20,000 or 100,000. Why this didn't happen with the Moriscos. Probably it happened up to a point, but it got lost in time. It just got diluted into the mainstream society. The reason why Mallorca survived longer than many other places was because the discrimination was external. So even if you had long lost any crypto-Jewish practice, you were still marked as a Jew. So it was a lot more difficult to be diluted in the mainstream society.
Is there a crypto-Islamic population?
I don't think so. At some point it may have been one, but I don't think so. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So